My husband ran off with my sister, then returned with a jaw-dropping request. When I was diagnosed as infertile, my sister immediately suggested donating her eggs to me. I was apprehensive at first. The doctors told me IVF made pregnancy even more dangerous for me, and carrying someone else's child just felt wrong. But Kyle and Stephanie assured me. They brought pamphlets and research papers to convince me the pregnancy would be safe. They spent hours telling me the origin of the eggs didn't matter. Kyle said having a family is all he cared about, and Stephanie promised I would be the real mother. After a lot of reassurance, I agreed. 9 agonizing months later, I gave birth to a beautiful and healthy baby girl. I was still holding her in my arms when my husband and sister walked into the delivery room and announced, "We're taking the baby." Kyle restrained me while Stephanie ripped her from my hands. "What's going on?" I yelled. "Me and Steph have fallen in love," Kyle said. "We've thought about it. She's the real mother of my child. You were just the incubator." I couldn't even process what was happening. Security was already here, and Kyle was shoving the already filed paperwork in my face. The birth certificate already had Stephanie listed as the mother, and before I could even say goodbye, my Isabella was being carried out. I cried until I ran out of tears. I came home to get my things 3 days later. Stephanie was already moved in, and I saw them through the kitchen window, slow dancing while my daughter is sleeping upstairs. I didn't even come in to get my things, just left for my cousin's house 2 states away. There, while they posted newborn photos captioned, "Our miracle," I applied to law school. Something Kyle never let me do. He always said women should stay at home. Within 4 years, I was specializing in fertility rights cases, helping women avoid the suffering I went through. By graduation, I'd founded a nonprofit protecting surrogates' rights. I joined a good firm and made good money. Even ran the Boston Marathon and traveled to Switzerland for conferences, where I met a guy I fell in love with. I built the life Kyle said I was too stupid to have. Then 6 months ago, Stephanie showed up at my office, completely out of nowhere, not to apologize or show me Isabella's photos, but to ask me to carry another baby for her and Kyle. "My body is my brand now," she said. "I'm a lifestyle influencer. I can't lose my figure. You've already done it once." I stared at her in disbelief before telling her to get out. She tried to guilt-trip me, but I had people escort her out. I went home thinking that was that, but I was wrong. The harassment started immediately. Suddenly, I was getting bombarded with texts about ovulation schedules. Kyle was showing up at my firm. Their friends were ambushing me at the gym 5 hours away from their house. After 2 weeks of harassment, I was done. My work performance was getting affected, and my long-distance relationship was suffering. I called my paralegal friend Claire. I need to destroy them, publicly, but legally. Claire came over with wine and her laptop. We spent 7 hours building the case from hell. I reached out to their friends and found out something. Turns out Stephanie had spun lies about me, telling everyone I promised her that I'd carry her second child, that apparently I felt guilty for what happened with Isabella and needed to make up for trying to steal her baby. And because I never contacted Kyle or his family again, she'd told them I'd abandoned Isabella too. I remember staring at the lies with a shocked Pikachu face. But I was laughing too. I had a goldmine on my hands. I remember documenting everything. I contacted the delivery room nurses. I tracked down the forged contracts from my pregnancy. Even got records of every paper I'd ever signed. Then I decided it was time to meet them. Claire helped me plan the confrontation. We picked the location, timing, even practiced my exact words. I wasn't going to let my emotion prevent their destruction. A few days later, I invited them for coffee downtown. But what I didn't tell them is that I also invited others. Their friends, Kyle's parents, our entire family, even my long-distance boyfriend. Stephanie and Kyle walked in holding hands, him carrying new surrogacy contracts. But they stopped when they saw the crowd. "What is this?" Stephanie's voice pitched high. I slid my phone across the table. "Your gift from me." It was a public Facebook post I'd just published. PSA. I am not carrying another baby for my sister who stole my first one. A woman who rips a newborn from your arms in the delivery room doesn't get to demand you do it again. For those asking, no, I never agreed to be their surrogate. Yes, they forged documents while I was sedated. No, I'm not bitter. I'm a Yale-educated fertility rights lawyer who knows exactly what they did was criminal. Stephanie's face went white. "Take it down. Now. Your mom already shared it. So did Kyle's dad." She started sobbing, saying I was vindictive, jealous, ruining Isabella's life. "No, Stephanie. I'm ruining your life. You took my daughter, my marriage, my body. You don't get my second chance too. Enjoy explaining to your followers that their mama influencer has never actually given birth." Kyle grabbed the contracts. "You'll regret this. Like you'll regret forging legal documents? My nonprofit has taken on your case pro bono. See you in court." I turned around to walk out, knowing I was about to destroy Kyle and Stephanie. Because in court, they had one more surprise coming for them. A surprise that had everything to do with Isabella. The coffee shop went crazy the second Kyle's mom read my post out loud. Stephanie jumped up from her chair and started screaming at me to take it down while Kyle's dad grabbed Kyle's arm, demanding to know what really happened 4 years ago. My boyfriend moved between me and Kyle when he lunged forward, and 2 security guards from the coffee shop rushed over asking if we needed police. I stood up calmly and told everyone we'd handle this in court, not here, then walked out with my boyfriend's hand on my back for support. Kyle's parents followed us outside asking questions while Stephanie kept screaming that I was ruining Isabella's life, and Kyle tried to grab my phone from my hands. The security guard stayed between us until we got to my car, and I heard Kyle's mom asking him why the birth certificate was already filled out before I even woke up. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls from family members who saw the post going viral on Facebook. My firm colleagues were texting, asking if I was okay, and 3 reporters had already left voicemails wanting statements about the case. I turned off my phone and drove to Claire's apartment where she had wine ready, and her laptop open with tabs of legal research. We spent 4 hours going through every piece of evidence we'd collected, mapping out our legal strategy while my phone sat silent on the counter. Claire kept checking the post on her phone and showing me how many shares it had gotten, including from some big parenting bloggers who were calling Stephanie out. The next morning, I walked into my firm's office early to meet with the ethics partner before anyone else arrived. She listened to the whole story while taking notes, then pulled up our conflict of interest guidelines on her computer. After reviewing everything, she approved my nonprofit taking the case pro bono since I wouldn't be representing myself directly. This meant I'd have our full legal team's support without compromising my position at the firm, which was a huge relief. She also suggested increasing building security given the harassment I'd been facing, and said she'd brief the senior partners herself. I spent that afternoon in a conference room with Claire drafting an emergency protective order on my laptop. We listed every incident from the past 2 weeks, including the texts about ovulation schedules, Kyle showing up at my office 3 times, and their friends cornering me at the gym. Claire had printed out all the text messages and emails, highlighting the threatening parts while I typed up the legal filing. We included photos she'd taken of Kyle's car outside my apartment building at weird hours, and screenshots of Stephanie's followers making threats. The whole document ended up being 12 pages with exhibits, and we knew the judge would take it seriously. I called the first delivery room nurse that evening from my office while Claire sat next to me taking notes. The nurse remembered everything because she said it was the most disturbing thing she'd seen in 20 years of labor and delivery. She told me she'd kept personal notes in her diary about Kyle physically holding me down while I begged for my baby. She agreed right away to provide a sworn statement and said she'd been waiting 4 years for someone to ask her about it. The second nurse was harder to track down but equally willing to help once I explained the situation. The next day, the hospital's records department called back after reviewing my request for documents. The administrator confirmed they still had all the original paperwork from Isabella's birth, including the forms showing the custody chain was broken. He explained that Kyle had handled multiple documents while I was still sedated from the emergency C-section, which violated their protocols. This was exactly what we needed to prove the birth certificate was fraudulently filed, and he agreed to provide certified copies. The timing stamps on the forms showed Kyle was filling out paperwork before I'd even woken up from surgery. My nonprofit's board called an emergency video meeting that Thursday evening to discuss taking my case. I presented the evidence we'd gathered while trying to stay professional, even though my hands were shaking. The board members asked tough questions about the precedent this could set for birth mothers' rights and surrogacy law. After an hour of discussion, they voted unanimously to take the case as a landmark opportunity to protect future victims. The weight of representing not just myself but other women who might face this hit me hard as I thanked them. Friday morning brought an email from one of my biggest conference sponsors expressing concerns about my Facebook post. They questioned whether the tone aligned with their corporate values and professional standards they expected from speakers. My stomach dropped reading it because this conference brought in serious money and networking opportunities for my nonprofit. I wrote back professionally explaining the legal situation and my right to defend myself against defamation and harassment. But I knew my career that I'd built from nothing suddenly felt vulnerable, and I refused to back down now. That afternoon, my long-distance boyfriend called after seeing screenshots of comments from Stephanie's followers on Twitter. Some of them were saying they knew where I worked and making threats about what they'd do if they saw me. He wanted to fly in immediately to make sure I was safe, and I could hear real worry in his voice. I told him I was okay, but hearing how much this was affecting him made me realize the toll this was taking on everyone. He said he'd already bought a ticket for the next weekend, and wouldn't take no for an answer. Monday morning, Claire and I filed the initial civil complaint at the courthouse downtown. We alleged fraud for the forged documents, intentional infliction of emotional distress for what happened in the delivery room, and defamation for the lies Stephanie spread about me. The filing also requested expedited discovery given the ongoing harassment and potential risk to Isabella's well-being with parents capable of this level of deception. The clerk stamped our copies and said the defendants would be served within 48 hours, which meant Kyle and Stephanie were about to get their official notice. Walking out of that courthouse, I knew the real fight was just beginning, but I finally had the law on my side. Claire pulled up the restraining order templates on her laptop right there in my car outside the courthouse while I typed out every instance of harassment from the past 2 weeks. The gym ambushes 5 hours from their house, Kyle showing up at my firm 3 times, the endless texts about ovulation schedules that I'd screenshot before blocking their numbers. We filed the motion that same afternoon requesting they stay at least 500 feet away and stop all contact immediately. The clerk said the judge would review it and schedule an emergency hearing by Friday if approved. That night, I sat in my apartment going through old photos on my laptop when I found the one from 4 years ago that my cousin took without me knowing. Me standing outside Kyle and Stephanie's kitchen window in the dark, watching them slow dance while Isabella slept upstairs, my face wet with tears I didn't even remember crying. I stared at that broken woman in the photo and realized she was the reason I could fight now because she made me become someone who could destroy them legally. My phone buzzed with an email from a law firm I recognized as one of the most expensive in the state. Evan Murphy had taken Kyle and Stephanie's case and was demanding I retract my Facebook post within 24 hours and issue a public apology for defamation or face immediate legal action for damages to Stephanie's influencer career. I forwarded it to Claire and my firm's senior partner, with a note that their aggressive move showed they were scared, because truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. The next morning, my firm's managing partner called me into his office where building security was already waiting. They'd received anonymous threats overnight referencing my home address and daily schedule, probably from Stephanie's followers who'd been attacking me online since the post went viral. The firm was implementing new protocols immediately, including varying my arrival and departure times, having security walk me to my car in the parking garage, and installing cameras at my apartment building that afternoon. I wanted to argue it was too much, but then remembered the comment from someone claiming they knew which coffee shop I went to every morning. The security team spent 3 hours that day changing my routines and teaching me basic safety awareness, while maintenance installed new locks and a camera system at my place. 2 days later, an envelope arrived at my office with no return address containing printed screenshots from a fertility clinic employees group chat from 4 years ago. The messages discussed my IVF procedure and mentioned that Kyle's sample had quality issues requiring them to substitute donor sperm without proper consent documentation. My hands shook reading it, because if Kyle wasn't Isabella's biological father, then Stephanie had no biological connection either, and they'd stolen a child who wasn't even genetically theirs. Claire immediately started drafting subpoenas for the clinic's complete records from my procedure, while researching their compliance history. She found 3 other women who'd filed complaints about consent violations, and 1 pending lawsuit about unauthorized genetic material substitution that the clinic had been fighting to keep sealed. We filed the subpoena that afternoon, expecting them to fight it hard since this could destroy their reputation and business. The restraining order hearing happened Friday morning in a small courtroom where Kyle and Stephanie sat with Evan Murphy looking polished and prepared. The judge reviewed our evidence of harassment, including the gym ambushes and office visits, then warned both sides about making public statements that could affect the civil case. She granted a limited protective order requiring them to stay 300 feet away and cease all direct or indirect contact, though it wasn't the full 500 feet we'd requested. Kyle's face turned red when the judge specifically mentioned that third-party harassment through friends or followers would be considered a violation. The next week, Evan Murphy filed his own motion, claiming my Facebook post constituted online defamation and seeking damages for lost sponsorship deals and emotional distress to Stephanie's influencer career. The filing included screenshots of comments on her Instagram, where brands were pulling back and followers were calling her a fraud for claiming to be a mother who'd never given birth. Reading through his arguments about how I deliberately destroyed her reputation made me laugh since they'd spent 4 years destroying mine with lies about me abandoning Isabella. 3 days after that filing, I got a call from a lawyer I didn't recognize saying he represented Kyle's parents, who wanted to meet with me privately without their son present. The message was careful and formal, but hinted that they'd started having questions about what really happened with Isabella's birth, and wanted to hear my side of the story directly. I agreed to meet them at a neutral conference room downtown the following Tuesday morning. Kyle's mother looked older than I remembered, and his father seemed uncomfortable as they sat across from me with their lawyer taking notes. They asked specific questions about the timeline of the birth certificate filing and how Stephanie could have been listed as the mother before I'd even left the hospital recovery room. His mother pulled out her own photos from that day, showing timestamps that didn't match the story Kyle had told them about me agreeing to everything beforehand. They seemed genuinely disturbed when I explained how Kyle had physically held me down, while Stephanie took Isabella from my arms just hours after my emergency C-section, while I was still weak from blood loss. Kyle's dad kept shaking his head and writing notes while his mom asked about the forged paperwork, and I showed them copies of what Kyle filed that day. 2 days after that meeting, Lindsay Stevenson from the clinic called my office asking to meet about my case, and I knew something big was happening. She showed up at our conference room wearing a gray suit and carrying 3 boxes of files, and her hands were shaking when she set them down. Claire sat next to me taking notes while Lindsay opened the first box and pulled out consent forms from my procedure 4 years ago. She spread them across the table and pointed to blank spaces where signatures should have been, and dates that didn't match up. The clinic never got my written consent for donor substitution, and she admitted they knew this could destroy them in court. She kept saying they wanted to cooperate fully and avoid litigation while sliding more papers across, showing their internal review found major problems. I recorded everything on my phone while she explained how their protocols failed and how Kyle's sample turned out to be completely unusable that day. She wouldn't say exactly what happened next, but her face told me there was more to the story. The next morning, Claire burst into my office holding a manila envelope that someone left under her car windshield overnight. Inside was an internal clinic memo from 4 years ago, with my case number discussing something called Substituted Donor Protocol on Retrieval Failure. The document showed they used a different donor sample without telling me, and that meant Kyle wasn't Isabella's biological father at all. My hands were shaking as I read it 3 times and realized this changed everything about the case. Claire immediately made copies and put the original in our safe while we figured out who sent this and why they wanted us to know. My boyfriend flew in that Friday, and I could see the worry on his face when he walked through my apartment door. We sat on the couch and he asked how bad things were getting and whether I was safe from Kyle and Stephanie's harassment. I explained about the protective order but also the online attacks and how my face was all over social media now. He held my hand and said he supported me but worried about us trying to maintain our relationship through all this chaos. We talked until 3 in the morning about boundaries and what would happen if the case went on for months or years. He promised to stand by me, but we both knew the distance and stress were taking a toll already. That same weekend, Stephanie posted a video crying about how I abandoned Isabella and never once tried to see her in 4 years. She showed edited screenshots of old texts, making it look like I agreed to everything, and then just disappeared from their lives. Her followers started attacking me on every platform, calling me a deadbeat and saying I was just jealous of her success. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications of people tagging me in horrible comments and sending threats to my work email. Claire spent all Sunday drafting cease and desist letters to the worst offenders, while I documented everything for our harassment case. We sent out 37 letters that night threatening legal action if they didn't stop immediately. Monday morning, we filed a motion to compel the clinic to produce all their records about my procedure and any donor substitutions. The judge scheduled a hearing for Thursday and agreed to review the documents privately first before deciding what could be released. At the hearing, Lindsay Stevenson sat in the back row looking sick while the clinic's lawyer argued about patient privacy and proprietary protocols. The judge cut him off and said she'd review everything in chambers and make her ruling within a week. She specifically mentioned that any evidence of fraud or consent violations would be made available to both parties immediately. 5 days later, Claire got a call from the hospital saying they found the security footage we subpoenaed from the day Isabella was born. We drove over immediately and sat in a small office watching grainy black and white video from the hallway outside my room. The timestamp showed Kyle going in and out multiple times while I was still unconscious from the emergency surgery. At one point, he's clearly carrying a stack of papers, and a nurse stops him, but he shows her something and she lets him pass. The hospital administrator admitted this violated their protocols since I couldn't consent to anything while sedated from the C-section. We got copies of everything and added it to our growing pile of evidence against them. The following week, the court appointed Chelsea Murphy as guardian ad litem to represent Isabella's interests in the custody matter. She called my office that afternoon to schedule an interview about my intentions regarding Isabella and what I was really seeking. I met with her 3 days later in a neutral location and tried to stay calm while explaining everything that happened. She asked if I wanted full custody or just visitation, and I told her honestly that I didn't know yet. All I knew was that Isabella deserved the truth, and I deserved the chance to know my daughter after being robbed of that opportunity. Chelsea took notes and said she'd also be interviewing Kyle and Stephanie separately about the situation. The same day as my interview, my firm's biggest client called the senior partners expressing concerns about the media attention I was generating. They postponed signing a $10 million contract renewal and asked if maybe I should take a leave of absence until things calmed down. The partners called me into a meeting and said they supported me publicly, but I could feel the pressure building behind closed doors. They kept mentioning the firm's reputation and how we needed to be careful about the image we projected to clients. I knew my job might be on the line, but I couldn't stop now when we were so close to proving what they did. The nurse's deposition was scheduled for the last week of the month at Evan Murphy's office downtown. She looked older than I remembered, but her memory of that day was crystal clear as she described exactly what happened. Under oath, she detailed how Kyle grabbed my wrists and held me down on the bed, while Stephanie literally ripped Isabella from my arms. She remembered my screaming and begging them to stop and how security had to be called, but Kyle showed them papers saying he had custody. Even Evan Murphy looked uncomfortable as she described how I was sobbing and reaching for my baby while still bleeding from surgery. The next morning, Evan Murphy filed a motion to seal all the court proceedings, claiming Isabella needed privacy protection from the media attention. Claire and I spent 3 hours writing our response, pointing out how they'd been posting Isabella's face all over Stephanie's Instagram for years, using her for sponsored content and brand deals. The judge scheduled a hearing for that Friday, and when we walked into the courtroom, Evan was already there with a thick folder of printed social media posts showing the hate comments Stephanie was getting. He argued this was damaging to Isabella, but our lawyer pointed out they couldn't use the child as a shield after exploiting her online presence for profit. The judge took the motion under advisement and said she'd rule after reviewing the clinic records that had been submitted for private review. 2 weeks passed before we got the ruling, and when it came through, my hands were shaking as I read it. The judge ordered the clinic to produce specific documents about something called donor substitution protocol, and the way she worded it suggested she'd found something big in those sealed records. Lindsay from the clinic called our office that afternoon, her voice tight as she asked if we could meet off the record, but our lawyer told her all communication had to go through official channels now. The clinic's lawyers fought the order for another week before finally producing the documents, and when they arrived by courier, Claire and I locked ourselves in the conference room to review them. Page after page detailed how Kyle's sperm sample had been non-viable on the day of the procedure, showing zero motility and abnormal morphology results. The clinic had substituted an anonymous donor sample without getting proper consent from either of us, just a rushed signature from Kyle on a form he clearly hadn't read. This meant Kyle wasn't Isabella's biological father at all, and since Stephanie's eggs were never used, she had absolutely no biological connection to Isabella either. I sat there staring at the papers while Claire called our legal team for an emergency meeting that night. We gathered at the office with pizza and energy drinks, spending the entire weekend analyzing what this meant for everything. The forged birth certificate was even more fraudulent now since neither of them had any biological claim. The custody situation was completely different with me as Isabella's only biological parent, and the complexity of the legal implications made everyone's head spin. Our senior partner kept saying this changed the entire case, that we'd gone from fighting an uphill battle to having clear advantage. Monday morning, we filed a motion for court-ordered DNA testing of Kyle, Isabella, and myself to get scientific proof of what the clinic records showed. Evan Murphy's response came within hours, calling our motion a fishing expedition and arguing that biological connection didn't matter, since Kyle and Stephanie had been Isabella's parents for 4 years. Meanwhile, Stephanie's influencer career was falling apart in real time, as she posted increasingly desperate content about chosen families and how biology doesn't define motherhood. Her comment sections turned into war zones with people calling her out for never actually giving birth while claiming to be a mommy blogger, and her follower count dropped by thousands every day. Brand deals started disappearing, and companies quietly removed her from their websites. That same week, my boyfriend called from his apartment 3 states away, his voice tired as he admitted the stress of everything was getting to him. He said he'd been patient and supportive, but watching me go through this from a distance while trying to maintain our relationship was harder than he expected. He suggested we try couples counseling over video calls since we couldn't be in the same place regularly, and I agreed because I knew winning this case wouldn't mean anything if I lost him in the process. We found a therapist who specialized in long-distance relationships and scheduled our first session for the following Tuesday. The hospital administrator's deposition happened that Thursday in a conference room downtown, and Benjamin sat across from us looking uncomfortable as he answered questions under oath. He confirmed that the custody chain break when Kyle filed paperwork while I was sedated had been flagged by multiple staff members who thought something wasn't right. His hands fidgeted with his pen as he admitted the supervisors should have investigated before accepting the birth certificate Kyle submitted, especially since I was still in recovery and couldn't have consented to anything. He said the hospital had since changed their protocols because of our case, which felt like too little too late, but at least proved what happened to me was wrong. 3 days later, we were back in court for the DNA testing motion hearing, and Evan Murphy fought it hard, arguing it was unnecessary and would be traumatic for Isabella. The judge listened to both sides for over an hour before ruling in our favor, granting the motion and setting a 2-week deadline for sample collection at an approved medical facility. Kyle jumped up from his seat and stormed out of the courtroom, slamming the door so hard the bailiff followed him out, while Stephanie broke down crying at the defendant's table. Evan tried to comfort her, but she pushed him away and ran out after Kyle. I was gathering my papers to leave when Kyle appeared in the courthouse hallway, getting right in my face before I could react. His breath smelled like coffee and anger as he grabbed my shoulders and shook me, yelling that I was destroying his family and ruining Isabella's life. Security pulled him off me within seconds, but not before Chelsea, who'd been observing the hearing as Isabella's guardian, saw the whole thing and started writing notes in her folder. She walked over after security took Kyle outside and said she was concerned about his ability to control himself around Isabella, if this was how he acted in public. Her notes about the incident would go in her report to the court about what was in Isabella's best interests, and I knew this outburst had just made their case even weaker. 2 weeks later, Chelsea called my lawyer to schedule separate interviews with Kyle and Stephanie at the courthouse, and I watched them arrive at different times looking nervous. Kyle went in first and came out after 90 minutes with his jaw clenched tight. Then Stephanie went in for almost 2 hours and left crying into her phone. Chelsea met with my lawyer afterwards and showed him her notes, pointing to specific parts where their stories didn't match up about why they took Isabella that day in the delivery room. She said Kyle claimed it was all about wanting his biological child, while Stephanie insisted they'd planned it together for months, because I was unstable, and neither story matched the paperwork they'd filed back then. The inconsistencies were so bad that Chelsea wrote in her report she had serious concerns about their honesty and what they might be telling Isabella about me. 3 days later, I drove to Cornelia Tanaka's office downtown, a small space filled with toys and books about family changes. She specialized in reunification cases and spent 2 hours walking me through what might happen if I got to meet Isabella, using dolls to show me how a 4-year-old might react to meeting someone new. She helped me practice simple sentences I could use that wouldn't confuse or scare a little kid, things like telling Isabella I was a friend who cared about her instead of trying to explain I was her real mom right away. Cornelia warned me Isabella might not want to talk, or might even cry and run away, and we practiced how I'd handle rejection, without showing hurt that could make Isabella feel guilty. She gave me worksheets about child development and made me promise not to bring gifts or make promises about the future if we met, since courts hate when parents try to buy affection. The defamation hearing happened that Friday morning, and Evan Murphy stood up with a thick folder trying to prove my Facebook post damaged Stephanie's career unfairly. My lawyer pulled out printed screenshots of every single claim I'd made with supporting documents, showing the judge my medical records from the delivery room, the forged paperwork with timestamps and sworn statements from the nurses. He pointed out that truth is an absolute defense against defamation, and everything I'd posted was factually accurate, even showing Stephanie's own social media where she'd admitted never giving birth. The judge kept interrupting Evan to ask why they were wasting court time on this when the facts were so clear, and at one point she actually rolled her eyes when Evan tried to argue about emotional damages. After 40 minutes, she cut him off mid-sentence and said she'd heard enough to make her ruling. That same afternoon, Claire called me from the office with news about the clinic emails our subpoena had uncovered. She read me one from 6 weeks before Isabella was born, where Stephanie asked the clinic director about ensuring she'd be listed as the mother on all legal documents, specifically asking what would happen if I changed my mind after delivery. Another email from 2 weeks before the birth showed Stephanie researching something called maternal presumption laws and asking if being the egg donor gave her any automatic rights. The worst one was from the day before my C-section, where she asked about emergency custody procedures if the birth mother was incapacitated, which proved she knew I'd be sedated and unable to consent. Claire said these emails were the smoking gun we needed to prove criminal intent, not just a last-minute decision. My boyfriend called that night from the airport before his flight home after spending a week with me, and we sat in his rental car outside departures talking about boundaries. We agreed to video calls every Tuesday and Friday at 8, decided not to discuss the case unless something major happened, and promised to be honest if the distance got too hard for either of us. He held my hand and said he understood why I needed to focus on Isabella, but asked me to remember he was waiting for me when this was over. The drive home alone felt harder than I expected, and I played music loud to avoid thinking about how empty my apartment would feel. 2 days later, we were back in court for a status conference where the judge announced she was appointing a supervised visitation coordinator to handle any potential contact between me and Isabella. She explained this person would create a safe environment for Isabella if reunification moved forward, starting with short supervised visits in a neutral location. The coordinator would report back about Isabella's comfort level and whether increased contact would be in her best interests, making it clear any reunion would take months of gradual steps. I wanted to cry hearing it might take that long to hug my daughter, but I kept my face calm knowing the judge was watching my reactions. That Thursday morning, I woke up to dozens of texts about a gossip blog post titled, "Bitter Birth Mom's Vengeful Campaign," with screenshots of old texts between me and Kyle from years ago. Evan had leaked selective messages trying to make me look unstable, showing only my angry responses without the context of Kyle's manipulation and lies. Within 2 hours, my legal team released the full text chains showing how Kyle had been gaslighting me about the pregnancy, including messages where he promised I'd raise the baby as the real mother. The blog updated their post with the full context, and suddenly the comments section turned completely against Kyle and Stephanie, with people calling them monsters for what they'd done. The judge scheduled the ruling on the defamation suit for Monday, and dismissed it with prejudice in less than 5 minutes, stating my post was protected speech about matters of public concern. She went further and awarded us legal fees, saying the suit was frivolous and seemed designed to silence legitimate criticism of potentially criminal behavior. Evan's face turned red as she lectured him about wasting the court's resources with baseless claims when there were real issues to address. 3 days later, we all met at a medical facility for the court-ordered DNA collection, with a technician following strict chain of custody protocols. Kyle sat in the corner refusing to look at anyone while the technician swabbed his cheek, and Stephanie kept whispering urgently to Evan, who kept shaking his head. When it was my turn, I tried to stay calm even though my hands were shaking, knowing these results would prove what the clinic records already showed about Isabella being only mine biologically. The technician sealed everything in special bags with signatures from witnesses and said results would be ready in 2 weeks. That afternoon, Chelsea called asking me to work with Cornelia to prepare a simple introduction script for Isabella, focusing entirely on the child's comfort if contact got approved. We spent 3 hours crafting age-appropriate language, practicing how I'd explain who I was without overwhelming a 4-year-old with complex adult information. 2 days later, Claire texted me that Stephanie's skincare sponsor dropped her, and I checked Instagram to see her follower count dropping by thousands every hour. The company posted about focusing on authentic partnerships while Stephanie frantically posted damage control videos claiming she was taking time to focus on family. Another sponsor pulled out that afternoon citing brand realignment, and by evening her clothing line partnership was gone too. I watched her income disappear in real time through her increasingly desperate posts about staying strong and not letting haters win. The courier knocked on my door Friday morning with the DNA results, and my hands shook opening the sealed envelope. The lab report showed Kyle had 0 genetic markers matching Isabella, while I matched as her biological mother with 99.9% certainty. The donor profile number confirmed what the clinic records already told us, but seeing it in black and white made it real. Claire immediately filed for an emergency hearing, and the judge scheduled us for Monday morning. Walking into that courtroom, I saw Kyle slumped in his chair, while Stephanie kept grabbing Evan's arm, asking what they were going to do now. The judge reviewed the DNA results and stated the birth certificate was clearly fraudulent, requiring immediate correction. She ordered a full hearing on vital records amendments, but emphasized that biology wasn't everything in custody matters, though the fraud deeply concerned her. Evan stood up, arguing Isabella needed stability with the only parents she'd known regardless of biology or how she came to be with them. He admitted the deception but claimed removing Isabella would cause irreparable harm after 4 years. The judge called Lindsay to testify about the clinic procedures, and she nervously explained how they substituted donor sperm without proper consent documentation. She admitted their protocols failed, and they violated basic informed consent requirements, while their lawyer sat there looking defeated. The judge reviewed everything for 20 minutes before appointing Cornelia to create a reunification plan, prioritizing Isabella's emotional well-being above everything else. She ordered supervised visits, starting with brief meetings in neutral settings with professional support to help Isabella adjust gradually. That night, I couldn't sleep knowing I'd finally meet Isabella, so I pulled out photos from my pregnancy and pictures of my parents who died before she was born. I made a simple photo book with captions about how much she was wanted and loved even before she arrived. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I wrote a note telling her she was special and brave and perfect exactly as she was. The visitation center had bright walls covered in children's artwork and a play therapy room filled with toys and books. Isabella walked in holding Stephanie's hand, wearing a purple dress with butterflies, and my heart stopped seeing her face that looked just like mine at that age. She was shy at first, hiding behind Stephanie, but Cornelia gently encouraged her to look at the puzzles on the table. I sat on the floor making myself small and quiet, while Isabella slowly came closer, drawn by the wooden animal puzzle I was working on. She pointed at the giraffe piece and I handed it to her, watching her carefully place it in the right spot. We worked on the puzzle together for 10 minutes before she showed me her drawings of rainbows and cats. She smiled when I told her the orange cat looked just like one I had growing up, and asked if I liked cats too. The 30 minutes went by so fast, but when Cornelia said time was up, Isabella waved goodbye and said she'd see me next time. Kyle stormed out the second we left the therapy room, slamming doors, while Stephanie cornered Chelsea, saying this was too stressful for everyone, especially Isabella. Chelsea wrote everything down in her notebook, including how I stayed calm and followed Cornelia's guidelines perfectly while they caused a scene. Our lawyers met the next day to discuss settlement terms, and my team proposed limited damages in exchange for regular supervised visits, building toward eventual shared custody. We weren't asking for full custody right away, understanding Isabella needed time to adjust after 4 years with them. The negotiations went back and forth for hours, with Evan pushing for minimal contact, while we insisted on meaningful relationship building. Eventually, we agreed on twice-weekly visits for the first month, increasing gradually based on Isabella's comfort level and Cornelia's recommendations. The financial settlement covered my legal fees and damages for the fraud, but I accepted less money to get more time with Isabella. Kyle had to sign papers acknowledging he wasn't the biological father and agreeing to the amended birth certificate listing me as mother. Stephanie cried through the whole meeting, saying we were destroying their family, but the judge already made clear their family was built on criminal fraud. The agreement included strict non-interference clauses preventing them from undermining the visits or poisoning Isabella against me. We also got right of first refusal for childcare, meaning if they needed a babysitter for more than 4 hours, they had to ask me first. Claire high-fived me in the parking lot afterwards, saying we got more than she expected, considering we started from zero access. I drove home knowing this was just the beginning of a long journey, but at least now I had a legal path forward to know my daughter. 2 weeks later, the judge called us back for the final ruling on the birth certificate issue. I sat in the courtroom watching Kyle tap his foot nonstop while Stephanie kept checking her phone for sponsor messages. The judge read through her decision slowly and carefully, explaining that the evidence showed clear fraud in the original filing. She ordered the Vital Records Office to correct Isabella's birth certificate immediately. My name would be listed as the biological mother, with a special note about the egg donation and surrogacy arrangement. Kyle's face turned red when she said he had no biological connection to Isabella at all. The judge made it clear that custody would stay the same for now while we worked through Cornelia's reunification plan, but the legal record would finally show the truth about who Isabella's real mother was. After court, Evan pulled me and my lawyer aside to discuss settlement terms. Kyle and Stephanie wanted this over fast before more sponsors dropped them. They offered to pay damages for the fraud and emotional distress if we kept the amount confidential. My lawyer pushed for more money, but I just wanted guarantees about visitation. We spent 3 hours going back and forth until they agreed to everything. They would pay my legal fees plus damages, stay away from me completely, and never interfere with the visitation schedule. Most importantly, they couldn't say anything public about the case or post about it online. Stephanie cried when she signed the papers, but I didn't feel bad for her at all. The fertility clinic's lawyers contacted us the next day wanting to settle too. Lindsay had already admitted their consent procedures were broken, and they knew they'd lose in court. They agreed to pay both me and my nonprofit a large settlement that would fund our work for years. The clinic also promised to completely change how they handle consent forms and donor protocols. They'd pay for Isabella's therapy sessions with Cornelia for as long as needed. It felt good knowing other women wouldn't go through what I did at that clinic. My firm called me in for the ethics review meeting that Friday. I was nervous, but the senior partners were actually impressed with how I'd handled everything. They said I'd kept professional boundaries while dealing with an impossible personal situation. The ethics committee issued new guidelines for lawyers in personal cases, but cleared me completely. Even better, our biggest client called that afternoon to renew their contract for another 3 years. They said watching me fight for justice while staying professional made them trust our firm even more. The second supervised visit with Isabella happened the following Tuesday. I brought coloring books and crayons this time, which made her smile right away. She was less shy and actually sat next to me instead of across the table. We colored pictures of puppies, and she told me their names were Spots and Fluffy. When I asked if she liked dogs, she nodded and said she wanted one for her birthday. She showed me her favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out bunny she'd had since she was a baby. I helped her draw the bunny, and she giggled when I made the ears too long. Cornelia watched from the corner taking notes as Isabella started warming up to me. She even repeated my name correctly when Cornelia asked who she was coloring with. Near the end of the visit, Isabella asked if I'd come back to play again next time. I told her yes, and she gave me a quick hug before Kyle came to get her. Cornelia wrote in her report that Isabella was adjusting faster than expected and showing clear attachment signs. My boyfriend flew in that weekend so we could talk about our future. We sat in my apartment for hours discussing how everything would change with regular visits to Isabella. He was supportive but realistic about the challenges we'd face. We decided to push back our plans to move in together for at least 6 months. He needed time to adjust to the idea of being involved with someone who had a child, even part-time. I understood completely since this wasn't what either of us had planned. We agreed to keep our relationship strong but take things slower while my life settled into this new normal. He held my hand and promised we'd figure it out together, which meant everything to me. That night, I sat down to write a public update about the case. I wanted to thank everyone who'd supported me and share resources for other birth mothers in bad situations. I spent 2 hours getting the words just right, making sure not to violate the settlement agreements. The post included links to my nonprofit's website and hotline numbers for women facing custody issues. I wrote about how every family's path to justice looks different, and there's no shame in fighting for your rights. I emphasized that healing takes time, and legal victories don't erase emotional pain. The response was overwhelming, with thousands of shares and messages from women with similar stories. The next Thursday was my 3rd visit with Isabella at the center. She ran up to me when I walked in, excited to show me a picture she'd drawn at home. It was 2 stick figures holding hands with big smiles and messy hair. She pointed at the smaller one and said that was her, then pointed at the taller one and said that was me. My eyes got watery, but I kept it together and told her it was beautiful. We spent the visit playing with blocks and reading picture books she'd picked out. When it was time to leave, she gave me the drawing to keep and made me promise to hang it up. I walked out of the visitation center holding that precious piece of paper like it was made of gold. The schedule showed another visit next week and a court date in 3 months to review our progress. This wasn't the life I'd planned when Kyle and I first tried for a baby, but it was the life I'd fought for and won. Thanks for exploring all these questions with me today. It's been a pretty curious little journey to share together. Until next time, take care. Subscribe for more content like this.